The English uplands are a working landscape, and for that you need people. This is an urgent response to two ongoing and interlinked depopulations happening in the upland territory of England. Over the past decade, human depopulation in the uplands has been driven by the decreased financial profits of sheep farmers and will be accelerated further in the future by the termination of public subsidies provided to the farmer up until Brexit. But the uplands need our attention, not tourists or second home owners, but citizens to take care of the land. A land that was designed for human benefit. And today, the effects of humans leaving the uplands are fueling the second type of depopulation. That is the loss of England's biodiversity, as a result of soil degradation and habitat loss caused by centuries of sheep grazing. Practices such as ploughing and excessive use of pesticides are killing the microorganisms that keep the soil alive. Hill farming is the predominant form of agriculture in the uplands. It involves letting sheep graze on overly maintained grassland. The sheep act as ancient gardeners, exercising control over the land, keeping the grass low, clean of weeds and tree seeds. It is therefore no surprise that the English uplands are today the most deforested areas in Europe. The sheep are also harvesters of economic subsidies for the hill farmer. In fact, government subsidies are currently the only factor keeping agriculture in the uplands still alive today. Under the European Common Agricultural Policy, farmers get taxpayers' money based on the amount of land they farm. This is why the upland farmer, by using sheep, will always aim to keep the land from reverting back to its permaculture, which is predominantly woodland. However, change is on the horizon. The British government will soon replace the existing CAP with a new environmental land management system, which will pay farmers for the production of public goods, such as preventing floods, planting woods, or helping to restore wildlife. This is the framework in which the project tries to intervene. How can we begin to strengthen the upland population in order to restore the soil and replace farming with the production of subsidized public goods? And how can we start to rehabilitate a territory so privatized and fragmented? When we think about the English countryside, we often speak about the commons. They are areas where registered people that live nearby have certain rights that are attached to the land. The commons in feudal England used to take up a huge proportion of the uplands. Not just limited to grazing, the commons were active, constantly changing areas where peasants could fish, collect peat for fuel, cut wood for building, and even sleep under makeshift roofs. The commons were an asset to the feudal population, a vital resource. But after the enclosures, over the past 800 years, the commons shrinked, and their use as ground for sheep grazing is now limited. Most of the commons that remain today are hardly active. In many cases, not a single person is registered on a piece of land. And the uplands have changed from productive land to a form of constantly manicured leisure land. This project proposes a twofold strategy for the environmental rehabilitation of the uplands, which recognizes the existing, under-registered commons and the overly grazed and fragmented private hill farms. At any time, various projects of restoration are undertaken by different organizations, which often result in an inefficient and messy hotpot of conservation efforts. The organizational method proposed by this project is purposely based on the smallest territorial unit in England, the Civil Parish. The parish of Threlkeld is headed by a committee of 7 councillors, who are responsible for the upkeep of urban greens, allotments, and roads. With the addition of a BioCultural heritage guardian on the board, the project aims to initiate discussions within the parish for the establishment and upkeep of environmental shelters and restoration actions. But how can we start to introduce such practices in the private land of hill farming?
The days of compulsory purchase and forcing stuff through are long gone. That just will not happen.
The upland farmer, soon to face the harsh economic reality of the termination of public subsidies, will have a choice to make. To either keep grazing sheep, but with the added workload of producing public goods, or to sell their farm and retire. There will be an opportunity for younger farmers to buy that land, and some will. But this is a third choice. A future where farming is replaced by the actions that care and restore the land. A future where the soil is finally disturbed and awakened. The project utilizes as a starting point three existing devices historically established by the humans in the uplands, which have disturbed the land. The cowhouse, around 6,000 of them scattered around the uplands. It used to house cattle and store whey before sheep took over, but today it stands mostly derelict. The Drystone Wall, a romanticized device of enclosure and a functioning separator of private land. On a closer inspection, it is also a living organism itself. It has been recently classified as BioCultural heritage by UNESCO. Because the gaps are not filled with mortar or concrete, they are hosts of life, fauna and flora. The Drystone Wall is a wildlife corridor. Its porosity allows for life to develop. If the wall collapses, spaces for bigger animals appear. The last device is at first sight a natural one. It is the copse, a forested piece of land where birds can nest in. The birds help the nearby farmers by feeding on harmful insects. They are also easy to spot for hunters on the land, and the trees provide shade for the grazing sheep. However, it is a highly controlled piece of woodland, much like the rest of the uplands. The copse is never allowed to grow and expand. It is sacred, but caged. The new guardians will occupy and create biocultural zones that will vary in size, from a 2-meter buffer of a Drystone Wall edge, or more rarely the entire field. The interventions are split in two categories, defined by their temporality. Spaces for storage, in habitation, or just for nature to take over, are made of local stone, built to last for centuries, just like the Drystone Wall or the cowhouse.
Field maple, Gelder Rose, dogwood.
To establish shelter for the guardians, temporary roofs span over the edges of fields.
Let's wait until lunchtime and start planting then.
The guardians build structures on the periphery of the wall that vary in intent, from the permanence of the cowhouse to the temporality of stacked hay bales. The wall expands, thickens, and reacts to the changing farmland. The boundary between public and private is visible and open to negotiations. Although the guardians work to restore the land, there is still room for the everyday life. Collective spaces for working, co-housing, embed domesticity in the hill farm territory. Public goods are produced by each of the guardians, and the act of environmental conservation becomes part of their daily life. Key areas of restoration are identified by the parish council and allocated to the guardians. On the commons, the guardians strategically planned native woodland so that it is allowed to expand naturally on sloped hills. But planting trees is not always the solution. Peatland areas, efficient carbon storage holders, are in a state of deterioration. The guardians will help restore them and at times allow for human activity, such as suspended footpaths leading to bog pools. There is no single recipe for the production of public goods or the environmental restoration of our commons. It is precisely because of their capacity to change and adapt that the commons form such an influential device of the uplands. The environmental writer Emma Maris suggests that we must give up our romantic notions of pristine wilderness and replace them with the concept of a global, half-wild, rambunctious garden planet, tended by us, the humans. This project does not argue for rewilding, because to rewild the uplands would be to model an artificial ecosystem and its interrelationships based on how us, the humans, perceive it. The project aims to blur the boundaries between wilderness and civilization, natural and unnatural. The copse expands. Hydroelectric engines from the river flowing nearby provide energy. A newly established timber industry strengthens the economic activity of the parish. Further afield, human housing emerges between and over the stones. Growing of heather and hemp provide materials for the construction of the buildings. 800 years ago, the Charter of Forests outlined, "Every free man shall adjust his wood in the forest as he wishes." This means every man can pasture livestock in the woods as they wish. Because of this prerogative, those woodlands have been grazed and managed and are now called the uplands. The project begins once the public goods subsidies start to infiltrate through the farm economy. It suggests a new type of land management that aims not just to satisfy our current needs, but to guarantee the upland future. The Conservative Party was right in replacing direct farm payments with public goods. But for such a project to be successful, needs to be open to everyone, not just the farmer, and to exist outside the political spectrum. This is a mechanism for the unlocking of public good subsidies and the empowerment of the parish, the farmer, and the citizen. It aims to establish convivial environmentalism as a paid and urgent activity in the uplands, and ultimately to propose the making of our biocultural heritage.